morning. Let's see if the speaker works. Does it?
Yep.
Okay. Well, it's early. But then they're throwing us out of here at 3 o'clock. So there's some other event that comes in late today, and space at the Kennedy School is at a premium. But it is a brand new facility, so yeah, I got lost coming here this morning to find the place. Well, I'm Paul Peterson. I'm the director of the program on education policy and governance here at Harvard, and this is an opportunity for us to talk about the long-term effects of school vouchers. So much of school voucher research has been focused on test score performance with varying results in various places, but as we all know, test scores are only a hint of what might come, and it may not be even an accurate indicator of what will happen to people downstream. And so we should start looking at some of those downstream outcomes. Now, to do that, given the novelty of a lot of school choice programs, you've got to live a long time. And I'm proof positive of that, right? So, but it's really keeps one going just to see all the exciting new material that is constantly emerging in this sector. And so it's a real privilege to be able to be here and to learn from all of you during the course of the day. We're fortunate that the American Federation for Children has agreed to help support the conference, and we are grateful for that. And we are grateful for all the other donors to our program that allow us to host these events. Antonio, thank you so much for all the work that you do for the program as a whole and for organizing this particular conference. This is Antonio Wentland, the Associate Director of the program. So Antonio, what do we need to know?
What the format will be is 4 panels. 3 in the morning, we will break for lunch. We will immediately come back from lunch to listen to some remarks from New Hampshire Governor. And then we will have our 4th and final panel. All the panels will be up here. You will see presentations on the screens when they have presentations. We have chairs, our presenters, our discussants will rotate. We will have an open question and answer period for each. We will have someone to help keep time. We will try to run through and stay on time. If you have any questions, I'll be running around most of the day. I'm happy to help in any way with logistics. Thank you.
How much time are you letting people have to present their papers?
Presenters will have 15 minutes of time to go through their slides and give their remarks. Discussants will have 10 minutes each to give their remarks for one or the other or both of the papers. And then mathematically, there should be about 25 minutes left, but depending on if we start on time or if we go on a little bit, there should still be 15 to 20 minutes for open remarks. The chair for each panel will make sure that all of the folks here at the table will stay on time, and will also then help pick the questions from the audience and also close the panel on time as well.
So thank you, Antonio. We'll try to keep pace. We also want to thank Amanda Olberg. I don't know if she's inside this room at this point. She was at the desk as you came in this morning. She's the managing editor of Education Next, and she has agreed to help us out today with so that all of you can have the support that you need. We want to keep things moving, so I'll keep these comments very brief, but I want to introduce Ben Oberndorfer from the American Federation for Children.
Paul, thanks so much, and it's a great opportunity to be here. I'm Bill Oberndorf, and I serve as chairman of the American Federation for Children, which is pleased to help support this event this morning. For those of you who are not familiar with AFC, it is the only national organization in the K through 12 ed reform space with a 501c4, 527, and 501c3. Through AFC's 527, we back state legislative candidates on a bipartisan basis who support ed choice, whether it be charters, tax credits, vouchers, or ESAs. Through its 501c4 activities, AFC advocates for quality legislation with an emphasis on accountability and transparency. And through its 501c3, AFC seeks to educate parents that these programs exist and to ensure that once legislation is passed, it is properly implemented. Since 2009, AFC has invested over $57 million in its C4 and 527 activities. This has resulted in participating in almost 1,100 competitive state legislative races with an 81% win rate in the passage of 34 laws in 17 states. The passage of these laws, along with those that came before, has resulted in a further investment since 2009 of approximately $40 million, which has resulted in a total today of 500,000 low and middle income children attending private schools in 26 states, with scholarships that average $5,000 this year. The work of AFC can also be directly linked with the addition of 240,000 children attending charter schools over the same period. As those attending this seminar are amongst the most prominent and influential K through 12 researchers in the country, you play an extremely important role in informing key constituents as to the impact on the students who attend these programs and the broader impact these programs are having on traditional public schools. As a result, the work you do not only informs, but actually shapes public policy as legislators, governors, and philanthropists rely upon your research to make informed decisions. Because of this very important role your work plays, I would urge you to focus your research on metrics that matter the most to these constituents, which AFC believes to be high school graduation rates, matriculation to college, and college persistence. What legislators, governors, and philanthropists want to know is how children are performing in ways that really matter to their success as adults. They also want to see comparisons that matter. Here again, I would argue the comparisons that matter to these constituents is how children in a choice program perform relative to the traditional public schools they would have otherwise attended. And since we now have the benefit of decades or more of data in states like Florida and cities like DC and Milwaukee, we should be able to assess whether these programs are having a positive or negative impact on traditional public schools. In my opinion, there simply has been too much emphasis for too long on state tests in the research on K through 12. The problem with the state tests, as you all well know, is that they vary in significant ways from one state to another. They also are changed and altered in significant ways over any 10 to 15 year period of time. And given the fairly technical nature of the outputs, it is difficult for the general public to figure out what they really mean. To the layman, what you think is statistically significant looks insignificant to those outside of academic circles. I consequently urge you, I really beseech you, to shift the emphasis of your research to studying outcomes that matter in the minds of those who actually make public policy and fund reforms. if there is one test that I think you should be focused upon, it is the National Assessment of Education Progress. The most recent results just came out last week. I believe the NAEP is particularly relevant to your work because it is highly regarded and it is administered in all 50 states. The NAEP can also be adjusted for variables such as race and diversity, which are directly linked to poverty, unfortunately, in America. The latest NAEP results show Florida ranked #1 of all 50 states on an adjusted basis, adjusting for race and ethnicity and factors and elements like that. And it is, I believe, #6 on an unadjusted basis. 18 years ago, when Jeb Bush became governor and made this a priority to reform education, only 40 states took the NAEP then, and Florida was ranked 38 out of 40. If there had been 50 states, it would have been somewhere between 45 and 50. So today, it's gone to #1 for poor kids in this country. That's an astounding thing. Mitch Daniels did the same thing in Indiana. That's an astounding thing. And the state I come from, California, where the San Francisco School Board just last year threw out the Teach for America students because the union didn't want them. All 30 of them out. We have no TFA students in my city. That says what happens. That's what goes on, and then you look at the results. And California goes nowhere. And California demographics are not that different than Florida. So tell me what is going on between those two states. I would love to see you guys dig into that one. That would be a great study. Of course, your work is complicated by what data is gathered in the first place. You are hindered also in gaining access to the data itself. So something AFC can do is to help create uniform standards for the collection of data that will allow you to be able to do the most relevant research possible and to be able to compare one state to another over an extended period of time so we really can determine long-term effects. So consider us to be a resource and a partner for you all in doing that. Something that I also want to mention, and Pat Wolf and I had a just brief exchange on this before I came up here. It's really about mindset as to where we are in this movement. And Paul, you've been involved for a very, very long time. And I believe we should stop talking about this in terms of school choice. We should talk about it as ed choice for parents who don't have many choices. And that this is about empowering parents to determine whether it's a traditional public school, charter, or private school that is best for their child. That is really how we should start talking about this and writing about it and thinking about it. In closing, let me just reiterate how important your work is to the future of the country. It truly is. Your work has the ability to bring clarity to the debate of what actually works, which could impact the very future of literally millions of children. Let me also reiterate that you should consider AFC to be a resource as you try to navigate the issues involved in getting the most comprehensive data available for your work and on as timely a basis as possible. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for giving us that charge, Ben. So I think we should move quickly to the first panel. Steve Snyder is the chair. I think there are bios for all the people on the panel, so I think we should keep the biographical material to a minimum so we can get right into the substance of the conversation.
Snyder, the editorial director with the 74, and it's so exciting to be here talking about new papers, new research. We've kind of redoubled our efforts this year at the 74million.org to be covering research. We launched a new series called The Big Picture, where it seems just about every day, or at least a couple times a week, we're covering new important either test results release, new papers being released, new findings, and always drilling into some of the charts, graphs, images that can help even mainstream readers better understand what's happening in the American school system. So please check out The Big Picture at our site and consider subscribing to the newsletter, where research always plays prominently. I guess I'll take the lead to skip bio information and to jump right into it since the clock is ticking. Should we just start with the deep dive into Florida and Matthew Chingos?
Thank you. Should we get from here up there?
Is there a preference of sitting, standing?
I think the people in the back will like it if you stand up.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to come talk today about three studies of private school choice around the country that we've done in Florida and DC and Milwaukee. I want to start by acknowledging the kind of what Bill said about how AFC can be a resource and a partner on these issues. It's really true. I encourage you all to work with them. They've been very supportive of this work while respecting the need for the work to be done independently, of their advocacy efforts, but have been a real important partner, especially on getting data. So I just wanted to emphasize Bill's excellent remarks. So where we started with this slide's kind of now been made a little bit out of date by the work we've done, but when we started on this work a couple of years ago, we were kind of looking at a landscape of research on private school choice, which focused more on short-term outcomes such as test scores on state tests and other standardized tests, and parent satisfaction. And that early literature was sort of a mix of neutral and positive effects. So if you liked school choice, you'd point to the positive effects. If you didn't like it, you'd say, well, it doesn't make any difference. But then we started to get, over the last couple of years, this new generation of research on statewide programs that started to, I think, to concern a lot of folks, including folks who were sympathetic to private school choice, finding negative effects in places like Indiana, Louisiana, Ohio, and initially in DC. So there was really and these negative effects were concentrated really in kind of the early years of the program, the first year students participated. So there's a legitimate question raised, are these real negative effects we should be concerned about? Or are these just sort of kind of growing pains of programs or kind of short-term dips that result when students switch schools that we might expect to be different over time? And are these state tests even really the right measure, especially when you're comparing something different as potentially different as public and private schools can be? At that time, we had some limited evidence on longer-term outcomes, what I'll call educational attainment, meaning, do you finish high school, go on to college, do you finish college? Suggesting potentially that the impacts of private school choice were larger, but we didn't have any evidence on this newer generation of statewide programs, and just only had kind of a handful of studies. So I want to talk about three studies that my colleagues and I at the Urban Institute, in collaboration with Pat Wolf and some of his team, have worked on over the last couple of years. I'll talk in the most detail about the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program, and the reason I'll sort of focus on it is because it is the largest private school choice program in the country, and I think a model for what a lot of other states have done. So I think in a lot of ways is the most relevant to some of these current debates. But I'll also briefly touch on a study of the Washington, D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program that I conducted. It's kind of gets a lot of attention because it's the only federally funded school voucher program. As well as work by Patrick Wolf, John Whitty, and Brian Casita on the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, which folks are interested in because it's the first modern school voucher program in the country. So kind of the longest standing one. So to give you some quick background on the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program, until very recently it was limited to students who were from families eligible for free or reduced price lunch, less than 185% of the federal poverty line. I think that's now been raised to, I want to say, about 250%. But over the period that I'm going to be looking at, it was eligible to the most low-income kids. It's called the Tax Credit Scholarship Program. It's a voucher program because it's funded by corporate donations that are reimbursed by tax credits. It was first available in 2002, 2003, and it's grown to the largest program in the country. And the scholarship amount has increased from $3,500 in the early years to more than $6,000 today. So the methodology of this study is going to be to compare the kids who participated in the FTC program to a matched group of similar non-participants. Now it's important to you can't just compare the FTC kids to the public school kids, because to be in the FTC program, you have to be from a disadvantaged family. And it's not just you have to be in the free lunch program, which in general doesn't require a whole lot of income verification. You have to actually verify that your family is income eligible. So we would expect the FTC participants to be particularly economically disadvantaged. And we might also expect them to be educationally disadvantaged, given that their parents have decided to look for an alternative to the current school that they're attending, which in most cases would be a traditional public school. So the way we do this is we say, for our kind of group of kids to compare to the FTC kids, we're going to say you have to be eligible for your reduced lunch. We're going to say we're going to look at a kid who was in the same public school in the same grade and year before you participated in FTC. And then we're going to want to match as closely as we can on test scores. So the idea is, imagine two kids in the same grade, same school, same year, it's a public school. They get a similar score on the FCAT, which is Florida's test. They're similar in terms of their language spoken at home, whether they were born in this country, their race or ethnicity, their disability status, and their age. And then the next year, one kid goes to the FTC program and the other kid stays in the public school system. We then fast forward the clock and see what happens to them many years later in terms of, do they enroll in college and do they graduate from college. We're going to calculate effects separately for students who entered in earlier grades versus later grades. We thought that we had theoretical reasons to think that might matter. It turns out it doesn't really matter for the results, so I'll kind of gloss over that to some degree when we get to the results. One limitation of this study is we currently only observe enrollment at public colleges in Florida. It's about 80% of all enrollments, and we're actually now pretty close to getting data that'll enable us to look at college enrollment pretty much anywhere in the country, including private college in and out of Florida and public colleges that are not in Florida. So we think that'll strengthen the study, and it means that we're going to be kind of going back to these data and conducting some additional analyses. So even though this work has been published on the Urban Institute website, I encourage you to go take a look at it. The discussion and Q&A will be helpful because it can give us some great ideas for what to do in the kind of next round of this study. So to give you some results, so this is comparing the FTC kids who first entered the FTC program between 2004 and 2010. We need that period so we have enough time to follow these kids through to college, compared to this matched set of public school kids. And if you look in the paper, you'll see the tables kind of comparing before they participated in the program. These are really very similar groups of kids in everything we observe. Of course, we can't rule out they're different on things we don't observe, but because the kind of population of Florida kids is so big from which we can draw our comparison group, we can really do a very close match. So what you see here is that regardless of whether you entered the FTC program in elementary, middle school, or in high school, you're more likely to enroll in college if you're participating in the FTC program than if you never participate. So the kids who never participate enroll in college at rates of about 39%, 42%, whereas it's 6 percentage points higher, an increase of about 15%. And what you'll see here is that almost all of that effect is concentrated in what I'm calling community colleges. Here in Florida, they call them Florida State colleges, which some of them actually do offer 4-year degrees. But it's to distinguish between the community college system, which is mostly two-year degrees, and the university system, which is exclusively 4-year degrees. So you'll see that's where most of the effect is. There's this kind of a small significant effect in university enrollment for grades 3 through 7. Now this is sort of this average effect, what Bill might call statistically significant for us researchers, but maybe not so useful to people making policy because it's averaging over a whole bunch of types of experiences. It's averaging over kids who are in the program for 1 year or 2 years, which is, I think, about half the kids in the program. A lot of kids don't stay. But it's also averaging over the experiences of kids who stay in the program for a longer period of time, where we might expect the effects to be quite different. So we also use kind of a similar methodology to look at kids based on the number of years that they participated in the program, compared to kids who never participated in the program. And what we see is if you participate for only 1 year in the program, there's not that much of an effect. And that's kind of what we would expect if something happens for 1 out of your 13 years in K-12 education. If we did see an effect there, I think I would start to worry that maybe our methodology isn't working, or maybe it's something more of what researchers call a selection effect. So I think in a way it's reassuring that we don't see much after 1 year. What you see after 2, 3, and 4 years, this is for the kids who first participated in the early grades, you see positive effects that get much larger by the time you're in it for 4 or more years, the effects are something like 12 or 14 percentage points, which is a sizable increase given that kind of the base college going rate of the public school kids. It's about 40%. So 40 up to 54 is quite a big difference. And you do start to see maybe a little bit of something on the university enrollment. And it's a similar pattern of results for kids who first participate in high school, where now 4 more years means you're in it for all of high school. Now, when you turn from enrollment to attainment, the story changes a little bit, or quite a bit rather, from a story of consistently significant positive effects, larger the longer you stay in, to not much of an effect, maybe for those who are in 4 or more years, not consistently significant. So on one hand, this raises something of a puzzle. Why is there an effect on enrollment but not attainment? At the same time, there's a bit more of a data limitation on these results than the enrollment results, because to observe attainment, you have to wait even longer. So this is only 2-year degree attainment, associate degree attainment. A lot of folks who go to community colleges don't go for an associate degree. They might go for a certificate, or they might go for with the intent of transferring to a 4-year program. So it's going to be a more limited sample of kids who we observe. And ideally, we'll continue to follow these kids and see what happens, not just at the 2-year degree level, but how many go on to get 4-year or higher degrees over the longer term. So conclusions of the Florida studies, that positive effects on community college enrollment, smaller to neutral effects on 4-year enrollment and 2-year degree attainment, the largest effects for multi-year participants, but most kids in the program are staying for a year or 2. We do see, if you look in the paper, there's some more detail on this, larger effects for some groups of private schools than for others. So for example, we don't find negative effects for any groups of private schools, but we find larger positive effects for schools like Catholic schools and schools where most kids are not on the FTC program. And we find smaller positive to 0 effects on other groups of schools, such as non-religious schools and schools where most kids are on a scholarship. So that's kind of the quick rundown of Florida. I'll do an even more abbreviated overview of DC and Milwaukee so we can get to discussion and Q&A. DC, it's a similar eligibility threshold. You have to be roughly for reduced price lunch eligible. This study is basically a follow-up to the earlier federal work that Patrick Wolf and his team led a number of years ago, looking at the lotteries in 2004 and 2005. The methodology here is quite a bit different from Florida. Is to look at applicants who won versus lost the lottery. The upside of this is that you're eliminating the possibility of unmeasured differences that could bias your results. The downside is it's much more an evaluation of the policy than of participation in the program, because it measures the effect of the Opportunity Scholarship Program, the voucher program, versus an existing system of public school choice. And DC has a particularly large charter sector, so it means that while I think this program tells us something useful about the DC program, it may not be as applicable to other contexts where there isn't as robust a system of public school choice. What you see here are small and not significant differences of enrollment in college within 2 years of expected graduation, in either the 2-year or 4-year sector. If you look at this quickly, you say, oh, maybe the effect's even a little bit negative. But what you see when you kind of expand the window past expected high school graduation, that negative and insignificant effect becomes to sort of a 0 and then a positive and insignificant effect. And those confidence intervals mean that we can't rule out positive or negative effects that we might think of as substantively meaningful. So I think this is a place where it's going to be important to kind of continue to add more kids to the study as they age and get a better sense of the outcomes as we can kind of zone in more on what we think the true effects are. So conclusions is that we don't see any effects on college enrollment right now. We can't rule out modest size effects. It's too soon to examine degree attainment. I think one thing we saw in Florida is that's going to be important to look at both enrollment and attainment. And these results may not apply to city with less robust systems of public school choice. Moving on to Milwaukee, and this is once again presenting work that Patrick Wolf and his colleagues did. A similar eligibility rule, slightly different but pretty close to free reduced lunch. It's a pretty big program, almost 28,000 kids today. Patrick and his team's study tracked students over 11 years beginning in 2006. It's a similar methodology to the Florida study in terms of comparing participants in the Milwaukee voucher program to a matched group of similar non-participants in the Milwaukee public schools in terms of being in the same grade neighborhood, similar baseline test scores, race, gender, English language, and calculating effects for both grade 9, where their team had previously reported some positive effects, but also grades 3 to 8, where results had never been calculated or reported before. So I'll show you the results for students who were first in grade 9 in the study, but the results for grades 3 to 8 are pretty similar. And what they see here are positive effects on college enrollment, but unlike in Florida where it was mostly in the 2-year sector, here it was mostly in the 4-year sector. But similar to Florida, they see an effect on enrollment, but not much of an effect on attainment. So, and as I said, that finding holds both for grade 9 and grades 3 to 8. So it's consistent across those grades in a similar fashion to what we saw in Florida. So I don't think I need to summarize all my findings again, since hopefully it wasn't too long of a talk, and I only have 1 minute left. But I want to kind of quickly turn to some kind of future research that I think is important to kind of put this together and help us better make sense of it and kind of come up with results that are more relevant to what policymakers are doing in states around the country. One is just to continue to track students' outcomes, especially as more old enough to have graduated from college, to kind of better understand what's happening on both the enrollment and the graduation parts of the pipeline. Second is I think we need to study more programs so we can understand how these programs are working in different states around the country, especially if we think that a model like Florida is the one being adopted by other states. Well, presumably we want to understand how statewide programs are working elsewhere, because results from places like Milwaukee and DC may be relevant to cities, but not necessarily to states. And I think we also want to look at variation within programs to better understand the role of program design. Because at the end of the day, there aren't going to, even if there's 30 of these programs, we're going to have to wait 20 years to study all of them. So I think there are things we can learn from variation within programs, such as doing more to understand the effects of attending different kinds of private schools, to think about not just should we have a school choice program or not, because I think that's driven less by research and more just by kind of values about the kinds of choices we want to make available to parents. But how do we design these policies in a way so that they're going to work best to the benefit of students and their families? And finally, I think we need to better understand the connection between short and long-term outcomes, because the problem with these long-term studies is that by the time you've done them, so much time has passed. It's kind of a question, well, is the data from Florida from 10, 15 years ago, from when the kids participated in the program, and now we can see what happened to them in terms of college, is what does that tell us about the program today? I think it tells us something valuable, or I wouldn't have done the work. But I think to the extent we can sort of better understand this connection and come up with short-term outcomes that we have greater confidence are going to tell us something about long-term outcomes, that will be important so we can assess the effects of programs both accurately but also in a time frame where we can make a difference. So thanks for your attention and look forward to the discussion.
Let's see, so I'll need the slides for the next set. Here comes our great leader.
So in the meantime, we could have a lengthy biographical sketch.
Or not. Good morning, I'm Julian Betts from the San Diego Education Research Alliance at UC San Diego, and this paper is looking at school choice in the San Diego Unified School District. My co-authors are former grad students Sam Young, Andrew Zhao, and Karen Bachhofer are colleagues of mine at Sandera, and we've been working together with the district for about 18 years. And what we're looking at in this paper is medium and long-term effects of 3 types of public school choice in San Diego. So this has already been said by Matt, but most of the studies of school choice look at short-term outcomes, such as test scores. Relatively few studies look at longer-term outcomes, such as graduating from high school, college attendance, and so on. And so our specific goal in this paper is to look at post-secondary outcomes as a function of whether you win or lose a lottery, looking at years of post-secondary schooling, college attainment in terms of degrees. We also look at a number of high school outcomes that we selected because we feel that they're measures of college readiness. An advantage of the study is we're using lotteries as sort of the gold standard in the sense that our comparison group is students who on average should be identical. It's just the luck of the draw who won the lottery and who didn't. We're looking at 3 different types of public school choice, and in our estimates of impact of treatment on the treated, which means what's the impact of actually being awarded a school choice slot and using it, we actually take into account the possibility that lottery losers, say to a magnet school, may win a lottery elsewhere in a different type of program. And I think that as our research on school choice proceeds, this is something that we're going to have to look at as a whole, as a literature, because the school choice field is becoming more and more crowded with more and more options each year. Very little time, so there's actually a good literature review in the paper. All I'm going to say is the most similar paper to ours is one by Deming, Hastings, Kane, and Stager. They looked at a large school district in North Carolina using lottery data and looked at college outcomes and found positive effects of winning a lottery on college enrollment and degrees. And the gains in their study are quite curiously concentrated mainly among girls. There are a lot of other studies of school choice, usually not looking at post-secondary outcomes, and the results are typically mixed, regardless of whether you look at the magnet school literature, the open enrollment literature, the charter school literature, and so on. So let me tell you about the three types of school choice we will be looking at in San Diego. The first is magnet schools, which are traditional public schools, but which have a different curricular theme, often different pedagogical approaches. During the period we study, there were about 30 magnet schools in San Diego Unified. Any student can apply, and busing is provided. The voluntary enrollment exchange program has its roots in a court desegregation order in the mid-1970s. The district hasn't been under court orders for a long, long time, but the program survives. It was initially focused on ethnic integration, racial integration. It's now focused on socioeconomic integration. So if you're at a low-performing school, you'll have typically 2 or 3 schools that you could opt to be bused to. And then the third type of program is a statewide program in California. We have an open enrollment policy called Choice. You can apply for an open slot at any school, anywhere. And an important distinction about Choice is that no busing is provided. And in prior work we've had published as a book through the Public Policy Institute of California and also an article in the Peabody Journal, we basically found that in terms of integrating the district, the first 2 programs actually do integrate the district along a number of different dimensions. School choice, open enrollment, actually works slightly and weakly in the opposite direction. We think it's because providing busing, free transportation, is really crucial for lower income families. Let me tell you a little about the lotteries. Students have to apply by a certain deadline. Each application is assigned a random number, and that's really the crux of what we're going to be utilizing here. The lotteries are done by dividing the applications, obviously by year, but also by school and grade, and then within grade there are priority groups as well. So here's an example how that might work. It varies from program to program, but in all programs the top priority group is siblings. If you have a sibling already at a magnet school, for instance, you'll be in the top priority group, and most siblings get in. A number of schools will have a priority group just below that if they offer a specialized course that is not available elsewhere in the district. And then here's some other examples down here. Towards the end of our study, program improvement school choice under No Child Left Behind enters, and the magnet and busing program VEEP actually start to give very high priority to students who are in program improvement schools. So let's suppose that enrollment cutoff occurs inside group B. So I'm showing that here on the right-hand side. Basically what's going to happen is that all the students in the top priority group, the sibling reunification group, are admitted. Only some of the students in the specialized course priority group can actually get in. So here's where the random number comes in. And all the students in groups C, D, and E, none of those students are admitted. So we're focusing our lottery very specifically on typically the one group per school and grade for which there's a true lottery, meaning some students got in, but not all. The data, we're looking at applications for school choice programs for admission fall 2001 through fall 2007. We have very rich administrative records from the district that cover roughly 20 years. We've also got college enrollment data from the National Student Clearinghouse, which is really important because the NSC has data, depending on the year, that covers roughly 93 to 95% of post-secondary enrollments nationwide. So we can follow people nationwide. We're looking at lotteries in grade 6, into grade 6 to 12. We've actually tried this with some elementary grades as well, but we don't have as much data on students who apply in the earlier grades because we want to follow people all the way to 6 years after high school graduation. So overall, we've got just over 14,000 student lottery observations. About half of these come from the magnet school program and a quarter each from VEEP in the open enrollment program. So here's a quick view of our data. You'll see, looking at the second to top row, that in each of these programs, roughly half of the students win the lottery. The next couple of rows show the characteristics of the students in terms of test scores. These are the state standardized tests. We've standardized it so that test score in each grade and year has a mean of 0 for the district and a standard deviation of 1. So you'll quickly see that for both math and reading, in the year that students apply to magnet and VEEP, they're slightly below the district average. The opposite is true for the school choice program, where students are actually somewhat above average, and we think that's because busing is not provided for choice, so it's more advantaged families that typically apply. And you see that carrying over if you look at the proportion of families where parental education is at least a bachelor's degree. It's quite low for magnet and VEEP applicants, but quite high for choice applicants. And you can see corresponding differences between choice and the other programs when you look at race and ethnicity. And just to highlight here just how different choice really is. Just about every one of those numbers is quite different from magnet and VEEP. So we study these programs individually, but we also look at pooled models where we look at choice in general in San Diego Unified. Well, you could say at the outset, why study public school choice? Because all the action is in private schools. It's private schools that really differ a lot from public schools. So let's start by looking at whether the schools applied to by these students are actually quite different or not from the local schools which they would attend otherwise. So the first column here is showing the mean of various school characteristics at the school to which the students applied. The second column is showing the difference between the school to which they applied and the local school they would default to attending next year if they lose the lottery. And then this final column is showing p-values for a test of whether there's really no difference between the school you applied to and the school you'd be going to otherwise. And you'll see that all those numbers are way below 0.05. That means that every single one of these characteristics is radically different from the local schools. The school you're applying to has higher reading scores, higher math scores. We estimate school value added. School value added is higher by 0.04 of a standard deviation. At the choice schools, math, there's a very slight but positive difference between the two types of schools. Grade point average is higher at the schools applied to. The proportion of students who eventually will be on track when they reach grade 9, meaning they complete the expected number of units with a GPA of at least 2.0 is 18% higher. Proportion of students who eventually graduate from high school is higher. Percent of days absent is lower. Citizenship grades, which is sort of a behavioral measure on the report cards, are better. And you see pretty big differences in race and ethnicity. And then the very final row, we also see that on average, students are applying to schools where parents are much more highly educated. 15 percentage point gap in percentage of parents holding a bachelor's degree or higher. So this should lay to rest the idea that, well, we're gonna find zero effects here because all public schools are identical. There really could be some positive gains here. Just a quick overview of the methods. The first thing we do is what's called intent to treat. What that means is simply we're asking the question, if someone is offered a slot in a school choice program, is there a causal impact of that? So Y is some outcome here for student I. J stands for the specific lottery they apply to. We put in a series of fixed effects for each lottery. The really important variable here is that variable win. It's a variable set to 1 if you win the lottery and 0 otherwise. So the coefficient we really care about is beta. If beta is 0, it means that there's no difference between lottery winners and losers in terms of outcomes. The other thing we do here is to increase precision, we control for baseline test scores in math and reading, and for gender as well, especially given that result from the Deming study in North Carolina. And we cluster standard errors by lottery. We also look at impact of treatment on the treated, or TOT. That's distinct from ITT. ITT is asking the question, if I give you an option to go to a magnet school, what's the impact? TOT is asking, what's the impact of not just being given the option, but actually enrolling in a magnet school? And we convert this using instrumental variables. A lot of social scientists refer to this as the double Bloom adjustment. The TOT effect is always going to be bigger in the sense of being further away from zero, and that's because it's taking beta, which is the impact of offering a slot, and dividing it by B minus A, where B is the share of lottery winners who actually attend, and A is the share of lottery losers who somehow get into the school choice program anyway. So essentially what we're doing here is two-stage least squares, where the key variable on the right-hand side is now, did you attend the school of choice in the fall after applying, and we're instrumenting that with whether you won the lottery. All right, let's see whether these lotteries are actually fair lotteries. To do that, we need to see whether a raft of baseline characteristics are identical between lottery winners and losers. The most important of these are baseline math scores and reading scores. So what you're seeing here are coefficients from regressions where we regress test scores during the year you applied on whether you won the lottery, plus those dummy variables for each lottery, and none of those differences is statistically significant. That means that the lotteries were conducted in a fair way. We also check for whether the presence of lag scores differs between winners and losers. It doesn't. The rightmost column is interesting because an issue in all social science studies is whether people disappear from the sample. And so what we're doing here is modeling whether people disappear from the district records the year after the lottery. There's no difference for magnet and the VEEP program. For the choice program, there is a small but statistically significant difference, and that carries over to the pooled analysis as well. So we're going to be doing a few more robustness checks before we send this off to a journal, but it does mean that if kids are leaving at a different rate from our administrative records, it really behooves us to control for baseline math and reading scores, to control for any differences that might exist. And that's something that we do in all the models you'll be seeing. All right, so on to the results. Let's start with the intent to treat. And again, what that means is, what's the causal impact of winning a lottery on outcomes? And we're starting here in this table looking at a number of measures of college readiness measured in high school. And every time you see a coefficient with a star beside it, it means that there's a statistically significant difference between lottery winners and losers. Oh wait, there are no stars on this graph. So we actually found no statistically significant differences between lottery losers in terms of being on track in grade 9, passing the California high school exit exam, and so on. The impact of winning a lottery on post-secondary enrollment, we find no significant effects, except for in the pooled model, the number of years enrolled in a tier college is a little bit higher 4 years after graduation. What's the impact on post-secondary graduation? So here we're looking at, do you get an associate or higher degree? Here we start to find some effects, and if you look at the bottom panel, this is pooling all the results. Students are a little bit more likely to obtain an associate degree within 4 or 5 years of high school graduation. That result actually becomes insignificant after 6, so it could be that there's a movement to accelerate the time to degree. The coefficients on bachelor's degrees are generally negative. So there's some hints in our paper. There's a slight shift. There's encouragement to go to community college rather than a 4-year college. And for magnet schools, there's actually a negative effect, but only 6 years after graduation. We've looked at mediating, moderating variables. We looked at all sorts of student characteristics. This graph should say race as well. We looked at all sorts of student characteristics. We don't find differences. We've looked at mediating variables since we found all these school characteristics differ between the local and the school of choice. Generally, those things didn't matter, with the exception of some high school outcomes and VEEP. Impact of treatment on the treated, very similar. I think I'm running out of time here. so you can look at the paper. But methodologically, I think this is important because we're actually, in some of these models, controlling for the possibility that you entered any of these school choice programs anywhere. So we're looking for what's called crossover bias. Because often in school choice studies, if you don't win one lottery, you'll get in somewhere else. That doesn't seem to be a big issue in these data. So just to conclude very quickly, most impacts are not significant. In the pooled models, there's some evidence that students are more likely, maybe 1 or 2% more likely to get an associate's degree or other certificate at a community college within 4 or 5 years, but that washes out. There's a negative magnet school college, 4-year college effect, but only after 6 years. Student characteristics, we don't find big variations by student traits, and even though we documented some really quite large differences between local schools and schools of choice, those variables don't seem to be mediating the effects. This is just one school district, and these are very popular programs, so there could be things here that we're missing that matter a lot to parents in these school choice programs. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. We'd love to bring in our discussants, and I guess I'll be playing clock keeper of sorts through the rest of this panel. Should we start with John? John Kirtley, step up for students.
I'm not going to be checking my email. This is a timer.
Okay.
I don't know. 10 minutes. The last thing, I've been called a lot of things by a lot of people, but I've never been called an academic. So I am a practitioner in school choice. I am the chairman of the nonprofit that administers 99% of the program that Matt studied. I'm very grateful for that study, by the way, Matt. And what I'd like to do with my time, but I think might be most valuable to you, is just to give you some real world context of this program. And Bill did an excellent job of introducing that context. And Bill talked about how we talk about these programs. And in Florida, the way we talk about them is we in Florida are moving towards what we call a new definition of public education. The old definition was raise taxpayer dollars to educate kids, give every single dollar to the school districts. School districts run every single school in a fairly uniform manner and assign kids by zip code. That was public education. Florida is moving towards a new definition, which is this: raise taxpayer dollars to educate those kids, but then empower parents, particularly poor parents, to direct those dollars to different providers and even different delivery methods that best suit their individual children's learning needs. And Florida has come further than any other state in attaining that definition. And it all started in 1998, as Bill alluded to, when Jeb Bush was elected governor of Florida on a platform of K-12 reform. It was his main platform in his campaign. And the legislature passed it. It was implemented starting in 2000. And it was a menu of reforms. Most of them were internal. Higher standards, more transparency for public schools, grading of public schools for the first time, not letting third graders advance if they can't read, rewarding success, paying teachers bonuses if they did well. But the most radical aspect of his reform platform was choice. He had a program that said if a public school gets an F grade 2 years in a 4-year period, the kids at that school could get a voucher to go to a private school. Now that program never got large because it was under a lawsuit by the union. It was never bigger than 700 kids. However, the tax credit program was passed when we saw that that voucher program wasn't going to get very large. And Matt didn't mention the size. It's now over 100,000 kids. And it has been a part of a growing menu of choice in Florida. And Bill mentioned that Florida has gone from essentially the bottom on the NAEP scores to the top. And is choice the only reason for that? No. But I strongly believe that choice has been the catalyst that has empowered all those other reforms to work better and spur improvements in the public schools. And I love to talk about this fact, that in Florida now, we have 2.8 million kids that are educated by the taxpayers in our state, K-12. Over 30% do not attend their zoned public school in Florida. Incredible. Now, let's look at Miami-Dade. Miami-Dade, in Florida, every county is a school district. So we have some very large ones. Miami-Dade is the largest. It's actually the fourth largest school district in the country. 350,000 kids. In Miami-Dade, over 70% of the kids funded by the taxpayers do not attend their zoned public school. Over 70%. And not only has Florida as a whole seen tremendous improvement, Miami-Dade is one of the best performing large urban districts in the country. And it's such a good performer that the superintendent, who I have great admiration for, was just, New York City just tried to lure him to come and work there. And he wisely did not do that. Let me give you 3 statements that Alberto Carvalho, the superintendent, made in recent years. First, choice is a wave that is inevitable. You can either ride it, surf it, or get crushed by it. Second, I'm not afraid of these charter and private school choice programs because we will create choices for parents in the district that parents will want to choose. And then finally, and I think this is the most telling, he said, now even poor parents are being empowered to make choices. We have to give them choices ourselves. We have 26,000 kids in Dade County on the tax credit scholarship program. They attend over 400 private schools in that district, in that county, over 400. And most of the charter schools, and I'm generalizing now, but it's pretty accurate, most of the charter schools in Dade were created when there was overcrowding in the schools and the district was encouraging their creation, the charters, to relieve overcrowding. They have a different attitude now. But, so the charters, for the most part, do not serve a high poverty population. The tax credit program only serves low-income kids. The average household income of the families in Dade County on this program is $21,000, and 90% are minority. And so you have to understand that this program was the driver that Carvalho, the superintendent, was talking about when he said we have to give poor parents more choices now. And even though it's on a large general basis, it's only, say, 4% of the 2.8 million kids in the state that are on the program, remember that we have huge market shares in very, very poor areas. For example, in Orlando, the poorest part of Orlando is called Pine Hills. There's a contiguous 2 zip code area, 2 zip codes. We have 3,000 kids in those 2 contiguous zip codes on this program. That's at least 6, maybe more elementary schools, equivalent of that. We probably have a 40–50% market share in those 2 contiguous zip codes. Similar aspects in Miami. When we get to the Q&A, I'd love to talk about a comparison between, say, San Diego as a city or that district and Miami. And what I will tell you is that Miami, the Miami-Dade district, is probably the freest market for education in the United States. As I said, 400 private schools with 26,000 kids attending them on FGC, another 6,000 kids attending private schools on 2 other choice programs. There are 130 charter schools with 65,000 kids in Dade. And then Carvalho and the district have created over 100 magnet schools. That is almost a true free market in education. And I personally believe that's why that district and our state is doing so well. Now, you'd think that such performance and such a success would be lauded by everyone, but it's not. And this is no surprise to probably people in this room, but we fight every day to preserve programs like this. And my words are inadequate to describe what this program means to the parents and the children on it. And I wanted to take the last minute of my time and show you a 60-second ad that was made by BAO, the Black Alliance for Educational Options. In 2014, the Florida Teachers Union and the school districts, school boards, filed a lawsuit to shut down the program that Matt studied and evict the 100,000 kids from their chosen schools. And the day after the Martin Luther King holiday, over 10,000 people, all poor, mostly of color, came to Tallahassee and marched to protest this lawsuit. So I just want to close by showing you images from that day.
Union is suing to end the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship. That would evict roughly 80,000 low-income, mostly minority children from schools where they are succeeding. Most of the recipients are from Florida's poorest neighborhoods. Scholarship parents and children from around the state came to the Capitol.
There are 10,527 people here this morning. And our message is simple. Drop the suit.
No destruyan la esperanza y los sueños de nuestros hijos.
Drop the suit.
Ultimately, if the courts have to decide, the courts will be on the side of justice, because this is about justice. This is about freedom. The freedom to choose what's best for your family and your child, most importantly.
And I have a phone call, so I'll check it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up, Anna Egalite from North Carolina State University.
Well, good morning. Well, good morning. Like Steve said, I'm Anna Egalite, NC State University, and I'm an assistant professor there, so I get to give the nerdy comments that John alluded to. So thank you. So let me just start by saying what a treat it was. Okay, the Chingos and the Beth papers were both really thorough, really rigorous studies. So that is definitely what we aspire to when we're looking at these types of studies, because you know, there needs to be these sensitivity checks and all of these various robustness checks to make sure that we can really draw informed policy from what we're reading. I think it's really interesting that they find such different results. Matt's study is studying private school choice in the context of Florida, and I'm just going to talk about his Florida paper. I know he referenced two others. And Julian's paper is talking about public school choice, but not charter schools. Let's make that distinction. He's talking about a magnet program, an open enrollment program, and a voluntary busing program to reduce segregation in schools in San Diego. And so I hope during the Q&A we can delve into that a little bit. Why are there such differing findings from these different types of choice? And what is it that's distinct about a private school environment that a public school choice program doesn't have similar attainment effects? I think that's really important to delve into. I'd like to speak about them separately. So with the Chingos et al. Paper, so this program has been in existence since 2001, and there's a lot to be learned from it because so many other states are imitating this approach. I know that it's structured as a tax credit, but it's a voucher type program, and many of the voucher programs that we've seen enacted in recent years imitate the Florida approach in that they are statewide programs with increasingly more generous income eligibility requirements that allow more of the middle income families to access the programs. So Matt's study has implications for states like North Carolina, where I'm based, Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, and so on. And so I think that's really important. I also think it's important to note that the Florida program has been around since 2001, and in the early days of the program, it was structured in such a way that we had rigorous test score information about the program. We don't have that right now. The program has been restructured so that we don't have an estimate of the program's academic impact. We haven't had one since 2011-12. And I would argue that creates an information vacuum. Matt's study certainly helps to fill that by providing us with information about attainment results, but like he mentioned in his comments, he's studying students that entered this program 14 years ago. Are we okay with waiting 14 years to know, oh, was that program a good idea for you, that child, or that subgroup of kids to benefit? So I think that there's great value to these long-term studies, but that they are not a substitute for the short-term studies that also need to be carried out. And we can argue about whether test scores alone are sufficient to judge the quality of a program, but I think that they certainly still need to play a role. In terms of the methodology of the program, I love that they compare, so it's a matching approach. This is not the gold standard, this is not a lottery study, and I understand that can't always be done, but it's a really high quality matching study. And that's something that I think is really valuable, which I know that Pat Wolfin and his colleagues in Milwaukee also took efforts to take this approach, which is comparing students who are most similar at baseline, in Matt's case, by comparing students who came from the same public schools. So looking at students who were in the same public school grade in a given year and then took diverging paths and looking at their outcomes over time. This is huge because in Matt's case, it ensures that their geographic proximity to a college is similar. So we can't say that the results are just because there were no easy colleges to get to for kids in one sector or another. This is huge. But I would also say that it means that kids in those two groups had access to the same private schools, had access to similar neighborhoods with similar resources and opportunities, similar income levels and makeup. And so why didn't one group take advantage of this opportunity? I think that in some ways that's worrying, that it means that the group of kids we're matching to are different in some unique way that we are maybe not accounting for. And maybe even by matching a neighborhood, we're exacerbating that difference. If they're so similar in so many ways, why didn't one group take up this opportunity? And we can try control for that with as many of the control variables that the state collects in their data sets. And that's just by a side note. I thought it was really cool that in Matt's case, Florida is collecting information on nativity of kids. That's the country in which they're born. Not all states are collecting that, but that's really useful. I think especially when we're looking at Hispanic populations and we're trying to understand this subgroup. It's not a very cohesive group in many cases. I lived in Florida for many years, and so native-born students and foreign-born students have different cultural experiences, and it's really cool that in Florida's case, the state is collecting those data so we can control for that. In Julian's paper, I thought it was really cool that the state is collecting parents' educational attainment information. Do the parents have bachelor's degree, master's degree? That's not always collected at the state level, and that's really useful for researchers. It's low cost for the states to add that additional item on their list, but I think that pays dividends over time. Matt's paper does a really nice job of testing the matching approach. So they initially match 5 control group students to every 1 treatment group students. And you might worry that there would be unequal measurement error because you're averaging across 5 students on the control group side, but actually they do robustness checks where they do 1-to-1 nearest neighbor matching, and it doesn't really change much. So it's really cool that they do test that. The big limitations of the Florida paper, did the control group kids fail to attend college? Is that the correct interpretation, or did they just move out of Florida? So they're no longer observed in the data. And we can't say for sure that there is a positive attainment effect until we know what happened to those control group kids. We can observe 21% of first-time degree or certificate-seeking undergrad students in Florida. And so I think that Matt is alluding to the fact that they may be able to access National Student Clearinghouse records for those students, and that would be awesome. That would certainly help me sleep better, knowing, okay, now we're able to track students into the private colleges and out of state. In particular, that made me a little skeptical of the dosage effects. So they report large effects for kids who spend over 4 years in the tax credit scholarship program of 18 percentage points. One way maybe to test for if there's bias in this would be to reverse the analysis and estimate the effect of attending a TPS, a traditional public school, for 4 years, and that would maybe give us a sense of if it's missing data at play or if it's truly a dosage effect for the tax credit scholarship program. The ideal analysis would compare tax credit scholarship students to public school kids who are confirmed to still be in state, but you'd need a third data source to verify that. So please link tax records with kids' K-12 attainment. Let me see. I think it's really interesting that Matt reports larger impacts associated with attending particular types of private schools, like older private schools or Catholic private schools. I think for us during the Q&A, it would be interesting to tease that out. What are the policy implications? Do we want to incentivize or reward schools that cap, say, the percentage of a school population that receives vouchers? Can a struggling school that's 90% voucher regenerate itself? I don't know. A lot of private schools that are cautious and well established and are shown to be effective for students do this anyway. They cap, we won't take X percent, more than X percent of voucher students because we don't want to be financially exposed if the program goes away. So I wonder if we should think about putting that in policy, that a private school can't become 90% voucher. Just something I think that we should consider. Let me move quickly to the Betts et al. Paper. something that is important that I think a lot of researchers and school choice literature should be accounting for is this thing that they do where they say, okay, we look at kids who applied for a magnet school and we have lottery losers who did not get into the magnet school, and we don't just stop there, we now say, where did they end up? Did they actually enter another choice lottery, and can we account for that somehow in our models? That's huge. That's the comparison group against which all the treatment effects are being judged. Other researchers should account for this. And so I think that's really, really interesting. And I also think, just like, why is this study interesting overall? It's not a study of charters, which is, the sexy hot topic in choice or private choice, but it's something that I think that maybe many in the school choice movement aren't paying attention to, which is the expansion of public school options, maybe as a response as a competitive response to choice from other sectors, but things like open enrollment. Betts et al. In the paper say that 16% of all US students in public schools in 2007 were exercising some form of public school choice. So this is maybe something that's going under the radar. We joked just at breakfast that if an assistant professor wrote this paper, it would be 3 papers, not 1. They look at so many outcomes, okay? They have 6 high school outcomes, 4 post-secondary outcomes. It's really cool, 7 years of data, students in grades 6 through 12. They find no impact. There's no impact on any of those high school outcomes. There's no effect on the overall time enrolled in post-secondary education, no impact on bachelor's degree attainment. Wow, so little to no results, and maybe an acceleration in the rate at which kids are attaining an associate's degree or certificate. There's also no variation in the effects. So certain schools that they're choosing in terms of achievement or behavior, if they're not more effective than others, and no variation by student characteristics. So something that I think is maybe a follow-up analysis. Something that doesn't get a lot, it's referenced in the paper, but maybe could be fleshed out a little bit more, is the descriptive work about what families are choosing in San Diego. So we see that, I think it's very encouraging to see that parents are choosing schools with higher test scores, and not just levels of test scores, but they say they look at value added. So parents are choosing schools with higher math and reading value added, so parents can recognize an effective school. That's encouraging. And then they also continue to look at those differences, and they say, okay, they're also choosing schools with higher GPAs, better behavior in terms of this citizenship grade. Here's where I get uncomfortable. Higher SES and whiter schools. And so I think that there's work to be done there, teasing this out. How can we separate race from those other characteristics that parents are choosing from? And maybe so to look at it conditional on, achievement and grades and SES. Are parents still choosing whiter schools? If so, which parents? Is it the white parents? Is it also the Black and Hispanic parents? Because there's a broader question there. If there's no benefit in terms of attainment for these kids, but the program is potentially having a negative effect on what we hope for in terms of racial stratification, and that's an important policy consideration to paint a bigger picture. And another factor there is not just looking at the racial makeup of the student body, but of the teaching faculty. So are we losing out on Black teachers too? Black teachers and leaders? Are parents choosing schools in which more of the faculty are white? I think that's also important just for context. I have 2 follow-up studies for you to do. You said that parents are getting their information from the district by way of a brochure. I'd love to know more about the brochure, to see maybe an example of it, and then maybe, you have such a great relationship with the district, maybe they would let you experimentally change the brochure to highlight which information comes first, or so to see how large of a role the race of the school is playing in parents' choices versus the other characteristics that parents might be choosing on. Okay, I know that I'm out of time, but please let me say 2 more things because these are awesome papers. The finding about busing is huge. So in the voluntary program, and he showed us the column of descriptive statistics, there was much more advantaged families that were able to take advantage of that program. States should not be overlooking the role that busing plays. If we want families to have equitable access to choice options, we need to be providing transportation. And I would argue, I would add to that, from our work in North Carolina, we know that not just transportation is important, but access to free meals. We did a lot of focus groups with parents exercising choice in North Carolina who told us, well, they were getting free breakfast and lunch, so we had to go back to that. The education was not as good, but you can't pass that up. It's expensive to send a packed lunch every day. So that's important for states to consider. And then I will say, last thing, are states keeping detailed records of these lotteries? Julian showed us the different, it's complicated for researchers to isolate the true lotteries that occur when there's priority levels, you know, A, B, C, D, or do you have a sibling priority, or are you entering through some other record? And over time, you know, we might be looking at retrospective data from 14 years ago. Do the states keep track of the details of those lotteries, who conducted them, and can they be audited? Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously we're the first session of the day, and always time is tighter with those morning sessions. Love to get some questions going here. We can continue it during the breakout time that we have right after. And I can just tell already there's going to have to be some point where I do a hard stop, so I'll just beg everyone's patience for when I say we're done. But would love to open it up for questions. Please.
Hi, Brian Gill from Mathematica. Question for Matt. Anna mentioned, briefly mentioned the possible concern about the dosage analysis that I'd like to follow up on. So what makes you think that the improvement in outcomes as you look across kids who get more years in the program, what makes you think that that's actually a treatment effect rather than just the fact that kids who tend to stay longer are probably kids who would do better anyway?
So I think there are good reasons to be kind of more skeptical of that analysis than of the other ones. There's a few reasons why I'm less skeptical of it than I would normally be, and less skeptical of it than I was when I started doing, you know, when I did the analysis. So one reason, as I mentioned in the talk, is the lack of any effect for the 1-year kids. Like if there was some kind of overall selection effect, you'd expect it to maybe show up there. So that's kind of one piece. The other piece is, so in the paper, I think in some appendix tables, I report the baseline summary statistics by years of dosage. And obviously we control for all that stuff. But going into it, I expected that to be pretty bad for interpreting the analysis as a causal effect. I figured we'd see the kids who were sticking this program out for 4 years, they're going to be the less disadvantaged among the disadvantaged. They're going to have higher baseline scores. They're going to look like better. And I mean, you see a little bit of that here and there, but not nearly what I would have expected. So, I mean, of course we can't, even with random assignment, we can never randomly assign people to kind of how long they stick around. The other concern, especially at the high school, is, well, are we conditioning on kind of part of the outcome, that 4 or more years in a high school means that they didn't drop out. But in some, you know, we did some robustness checks where we control for the number of years that you're observed in either system, FTC or the public school system, and that didn't sort of knock down the effects. So, I mean, obviously there's always going to be some uncertainty about those results, but I feel better about them than I had expected to going into doing the work.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sharon Lynch. I'm at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. We've lived through a school choice kind of initiative for the last 25 years with pretty good effects, I think, right now in terms of, so sort of the person on the street understanding that about 50% of the students go to charter schools in D.C. And the charter schools live well alongside of public schools. I think that's fair to say. And if you look at comparisons of test scores with kids in both kinds of schools, they're pretty similar. But I really wanted to go back to the 2 great papers that started this out. I was kind of surprised to find no whopping big differences leaping out of either study, both of private schools or of the choice programs in San Diego. But I'm wondering if it's fair to say that maybe we need to figure out what the secret sauce is. Is it choice? Is it a belief, I think as John Kirtley said, it's sort of a free market system that's supposed to improve things? Or is it something else? I mean, should it be school change? Because unfortunately, none of the studies was able to tease out what was going on in the schools that were making a difference. I've been studying schools of choice, inclusive STEM schools of choice for the last 6 years. We're looking at really effective schools. We're able to say what the really effective schools are doing. And we're also able to look at schools in North Carolina, Texas, and Ohio, and we're finding significant differences in things like ACT scores for a specific kind of school choice that's well defined. That's inclusive STEM schools. Now, I'm not advertising for that school, but I'm saying in a research seminar like this, maybe we need to pull out similar factors of what's going on within schools, so that when we get these amalgamations that say, not much is happening, there really are important things happening, but we just have to dig deeper at the types of schools.
Can I speak in? Okay. A couple comments on that. First, I would say that another way to put the finding, the way I put one of the findings in Matt's paper is, if you're on this program for 4 years or longer, your chances of going to college are 40% greater.
To a two-year college.
Yeah, but if you're from a family with $21,000 in annual income, your most likely avenue to a better life is community college. It's not often, I think, that a kid from that environment is going to be even aware that they can go to a 4-year college. Now, that could be discussed here in a different forum, but we at the federal level, we spend billions of dollars trying to move the needle in K-12 with no results. This program in Florida actually spends less per kid, significantly less per child, and has produced the results that Matt talked about. Every kid is different. You're talking about, let's find the right kind of school that we can go create, and then from the top down, let's give these opportunities to the kids that need them. I think that maybe the answer is, let's empower low-income parents to choose, and those kinds of schools that you're talking about and that you're studying and that are doing a good job, they'll be created and parents will choose them. That's what I think.
Respectfully disagree.
You don't think parents can choose?
I think that the educational system and the people like the people in this room can do a better job at figuring out what goes into schools that's likely to help students attain a 4-year college degree, if that's a goal, or 2-year associate's degrees that actually help them economically. No, I think you have to dig more deeply into schools that work rather than just say it's choice. I would say the San Diego result with more integration is certainly one that I would applaud. I think that's not nothing. I think it's really positive.
But interestingly, you didn't see a difference, right, in San Diego in the outcomes?
No, it was similar.
Yeah. So you prefer San Diego's outcomes,
I would,
which
yeah,
were not different.
I would think in today's world, students who go to school in integrated schools in the long run probably stand a better chance of success in life in the United States than those who go to segregated schools.
If I was a parent, a poor parent, living in either San Diego or Miami, I'd rather live in Miami, where I have the ability to choose from a whole different array of schools, rather than in San Diego, where I have a very limited amount of choice, a prescribed amount of choice within the public system. As a parent, I have seen over 20 years enough low-income parents care so deeply about their children. They are able to make good choices. We have to put the trust in them. And it cannot be just a top-down solution for people that we think can't make good decisions.
If everyone will indulge us, we have time for one more question.
Could I just very quickly
Yeah, sure.
respond? I think the first part of your question was about surprised about the lack of results, the lack of 4-year college results in Florida, the lack of any significant differences for us. One thing we always have to remember about this is the school choice can do two things. It can benefit the participants in the choice programs, but it can also provide a competitive spur to the traditional public schools. And it's quite possible that's what's going on in both Florida and San Diego. If you look at the NAEP tutor results, San Diego every year stands out for having higher average test scores than most large urban districts participating in TUTA, and showed significant gains For instance, in math, in the last 2 years, one of only a handful of districts nationwide that did that. So it's possible that, and it doesn't matter whether you've got the gold standard lottery data or a matching study, if there are positive competitive effects of school choice, any study is going to understate the actual causal impact of the school choice participation, because the control group is actually benefiting to some extent. And that could be a portion of what's going on here.
We just have a minute or two for one last question.
Okay. Sue Lucy, Mass Insight Education and Research. We're based here in Boston and work nationally. I have a question that kind of, I want to span some of the opening remarks with some of the conversation here, as opposed to ask about an individual paper. It seems to me that indirectly, at least, a connection or possible causal linkage was made between choice in Florida and the most recent NAEP results, also in Florida. And I'm curious about that because the paper today on Florida was about private school choice, and yet when you look at the NAEP website on how schools are chosen for NAEP, they start with a list of all public schools. And so I just want to be clear in terms of the policy discussion and in terms of what indicators we're asking ourselves to look at and parents to look at, what we're actually looking at when we look at the NAEP results in Florida, and what we should and should not perhaps derive from that with regard to the effectiveness of choice.
Yeah, obviously, NAEP scores are public school scores. And as Bill mentioned, Florida, before this grand experiment in reform, which isn't just choice, but again, I'll repeat, I believe choice is a catalyst to make all reform efforts work better. Florida's gone from the bottom to the top. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, is choice irrelevant in that progress?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying how do we statistically and otherwise from a research perspective make a more direct linkage between the causal factors of choice and those NAEP results?
I would recommend to you, I would recommend to you a paper that was done by David Figlio at Northwestern, which after the session I'll send to you. He looked at the specific effects of the tax credit scholarship on public school performance. And what he found was that the more a public school had kids leave and come on the tax credit scholarship program, the larger the gains for the children that remained at that public school. Now he couldn't say why that is, he could only say that's what happens. You're gonna have to, subjectively guess. My guess is that the tax credit scholarship has not been mentioned. Sometimes these programs are accused of creaming the best kids. We take the worst performing kids out of the public schools. That's statistically proven. So if you take the 2 worst performing kids out of an urban public school classroom, my guess is it's probably easier for that teacher to do a better job with the 18 kids that remain. And that's probably why the scores or the gains were larger, and we saw that effect. And that's on individual schools. I also believe, as I said in my talk, that as Carvalho himself said, the superintendent of Miami, he went in and changed work rules with teachers. He got rid of all these ineffective principals. He created 100 magnets. He'll tell you, not me, he'll tell you, he did that because of the competitive pressures he was feeling from programs like the FTC, where they have 400 private schools to choose from.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank Matthew and Julian for 2 exceptional papers to start the day, and obviously this conversation could keep going for quite a while, and we can keep it going right now in our breakout that we have. And also a huge thanks to John and Anna for the great conversation. Thanks, everyone.